about why Texas was chosen for this tour?
Well, it's just a weekend. We do weekends these days. That's the sort of the most and the least we can feasibly do. So we fly out on the Friday and then we drive to a different city nearby on the Saturday and then fly home on Sunday. That's the way. And the reason why Austin and Dallas was we're trying to hit all the cities that we used to do way back that we haven't done in 10 years or so, or 15 years, just to see what happens. It's generally been a pretty good, the first time you go back to a place where people thought they would never see you again, tend to turn out, and so it's good. And so we hadn't hit this part of Texas before. We played in San Antonio and Houston. So we're just crossing Austin and Dallas off the list. Dallas was crossed off last night, or Austin. And,
Austin, yes.
And then Austin or Dallas
the
tonight, whichever Joe decides.
We were joking about making a shape of Texas and just writing Austin in it instead of Texas, because that's I think what his geography might be at this point. So.
Yeah, well, you never know. I mean, I tend to say you play a lot of shows. It's an easy mistake to make, and especially when you're on stage and you're doing that traditional thing of saying hello, St. Louis.
Nobody rocks like Springfield.
And it has happened even, I feel that I have pretty good presence of mind in general, and I'm pretty good at geography of the United States, but sometimes you just draw a blank. Where am I again? And the thing to do in that situation is to turn it into part of the act, which is what I did last night.
Awesome. I think we had to kind of roll with that at that point.
It was funny.
The joke was there.
It was good, right. It was just given to me on a silver platter.
I actually didn't notice it because I'm used to going to shows here, and Jen had to point that out to me. I was like, oh, that is different. So the Queers and Mr.T have toured a few times throughout the years, obviously. And why do you think this lineup works so well? And why do you feel like you have similar fan bases?
I don't know. It's always been. I guess maybe we established a tradition of doing it long ago, and so a lot of the people who are interested in it now were kids when they first saw them. We did many tours with them, many shows. So if you're 16 and just discovering punk rock, and at that time, the Lookout label and associated groups were a big deal for a lot of people, and so that was the show they saw. That's the show they still want to see. But there's also there's an affinity with the pop music as well between me and Joe. And I think there's also a lot of more aggressive stuff that I don't really stray into. But basically, I think there's a great overlap in the aesthetic between. It's basically punk bands playing pop songs. That is essentially what got records on the map.
For sure.
That's what made, if there's anything of value about my band, it's that we do that. That's a tradition going all the way back to the beginnings of punk rock when I listened to it when I was a kid, and that's why I tried to do it. Similar to Joe, and just we're really good friends too. So it always is a good time.
Yeah. Can you speak to the sound of your band and what makes this, I guess, lack of a better genre, pop punk kind of work, or why do people flock to it, or what's the influence?
Well, that's two questions. Why do people flock to pop punk? Because it's fun, and you can hum the songs and you know what the songs are about, and that's what makes the Queers so great. And I would say that we're not as good at that as a lot of it. Well, not most. There are a lot of bands that are not very good at whatever they're trying to do, but we're not as good as the Queers at doing it, and as many of, because I have this extra attempt to add a singer-songwriter element to it, which is not as easily communicable to masses of a crowd, and that's you got to do some digging to grasp what is going on in it a little more than with some other bands, and sometimes you do the digging and you don't end up liking it, and that's fair enough. But so my songs are sometimes a little more complicated than is necessary, and but it's just how I, it's just how I do it.
I almost like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like I almost, when I think of like you guys' style, I almost relate it to Motown to a degree. It's like Motown meets the Ramones. I mean, it's kind of unlikely, but it somehow kind of fits together because it has like the same harmonies. It has like some of the same chords.
I've never heard anybody say that before. I'm gonna take it as if I understand what you're saying, I'll take it as a compliment as far as that, because I think what you're noticing is just some traditional compositional tropes in pop music that we do and that my songs try to do. It's not simply Motown, but there's this whole tradition of American pop music that is, from the rock and roll era onwards, and even before the rock and roll era. So things like the structures of the songs being rather traditional, with the verses and the choruses and the bridge, and those things doing the things that they traditionally do, which is not mandatory. What the 60s freed people to have their songs have no structure and be about nothing. Although a lot of songs that did stick to the traditional parameters were done in the 60s and were great, and even further. But it's an eccentric thing to do to stick to that. I try to make the traditional, material, not just with this musical structure and everything, but also the topics, the content, to have to take that positioning and that material and add just some little twist about it to make it justify its existence, to be interesting beyond something that everyone's heard before. That's a little thing I like it when I see that out in the world. I try to do, but basically, I'm not an avant-garde guy. I'm trying to write as traditional a pop song as I can every single time.
And I feel like that was a big movement in the American era. So I mean, like, why wouldn't any of us be not influenced by something like that?
Yeah, but it's true that there's also, there have been various movements in pop, in the subcultures that have had a rock music element that have been delivered, and punk rock was one of them to a degree, was even in the beginning, which was subverting art, subverting the conventions, which I also think can result in something great. But they were the early punk bands were still sticking to the songs, and then as time went on, they got freer and freer from the songs, and it got less interesting to me because the songs are more what I'm in it for.
Right.
So, and when I hear a band that has, it's not that common. You're just going around at some show that, I only see bands that play at shows that I'm playing at usually these days. But you come across things, and when you hear a song that makes you go, that's a really good idea, that's a really good execution. That's not that common, but when it happens, it's great.
Oh no, it's the best.
And there are a lot of very successful rock bands don't do much in the way of that thing that I was talking about, while recognizing they know more than me. They're all successful and I'm not. On the other hand, that doesn't do that much for me. If I can't tell what it's about, and if I can't see some direction of where it's going, if it's not telling me something, it can sound pretty, but I just don't care that much. I want to have something I want it to be a vehicle I can jump on and follow to the end. And when a 2-minute song does that, it's like it does it really well. That's a miracle.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's like a bit of magic. So that's the ideal. It's kind of hard to do.
It is hard.
It's easy to misfire, even when you try to do everything right. And you can do it really assiduously and really carefully, and still never get anywhere, and no one will care. And that's the state of being a quote artist, which I've fully accepted.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I do have these strict standards,
Yeah.
Personal standards. I don't mean anyone else has to have them, but
You like to tell a story. You like to, gravitate towards certain things, and if you don't, or in that structure, you're like, it doesn't seem very genuine.
well,
Yeah.
your songs.
Yeah.
If you don't know what you're writing the song about, it's
Yeah.
very unlikely it'll be any good.
Yeah.
That's so it's more a matter of almost like a survival of the fittest sort of thing. I've found my songs that are poorly structured and not concrete enough or not targeted well enough are the ones that don't work, and you can tell the ones that work because that's the ones that people that mean something to people. They get excited about hearing them. They will ask you questions about them, and there's some that you can be very technically accomplished, but they don't touch a nerve up that people care about, and then you have to examine it and decide on what went wrong and why. I mean, it doesn't mean every song has to be a hit, but you can tell the ones that work, and the ones that work are usually are along the lines of what I've been describing. If they're going to get swept up in something, it has to have some meaning. Not that there can't be nonsense. I mean, beautiful nonsense is wonderful too, but eventually you want to know what this guy's yelling about.
Odd or interesting that's happened to you on tour, and if you don't have anything of that sort, like what's something memorable a fan has done?
Okay, I'll tell you the most memorable thing a fan has done is saying that she was going to come to a show we were doing in, it was a snowboard festival show. It's an unusual, unlikely thing for us to do, but it was with No Effects, was the headlining band. And so she said that she was going to kill somebody, and I did know who this person was, but she was mostly, internet person at the time, which internet at that time was maybe a little less, it was email and message board person.
Yeah.
And so I was wary of this, and it turned out she did come with a gun, and I was like was in disguise actually for a little bit because I didn't want her to pick me out. And one of our guys, roadie guys, he said, "Oh, this blonde girl was asking where you are," and I said, "Well, don't tell her." And then he said he went and he found the gun and took it off her, and so he saved my life. So that was
awesome.
good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was probably the
yeah, you're like, I'm never
weirdest
gonna
thing.
forget that. Sure.
There's been a lot of stupid. I mean, mostly touring is just like weaponized tedium. It's you turn into a zombie and nothing of interest happens because you're just staring. I always used to have. I'd have these plans. I'd bring a stack of novels to read because I knew I'd have all this downtime. And you do that for the first few days, and then after a while, your brain switches off for just self-preservation. There was this one. I have told this story several times. It's probably the weirdest thing that ever happened to us. This is when we were on tour in Poland. This was not very many American bands had played there because it was in the summer of '92. It was shortly after the Berlin Wall came down. Poland was no longer communist, and so that was why these things could happen. But it was a very strange world. It was a very backwards world. There were you'd have traffic jams because of a horse cart that would be stalled in the middle of the road, and things like that would happen a lot in the trips to Poland. So at this one show, after the show, the guys who had been organizing it, they were all at these youth centers, still felt very communist. And they said, now we go to a hotel. And we were bowled over by the idea of staying in a hotel. We were the kind of band that never made enough money to stay in a hotel. I mean, that had never happened. But, okay, I don't know what I was expecting, some sort of crumbling, palace of Krakow or some kind of thing, sort of old-timey hotel that once you squint your eyes, you could see the glamour of the 20s or something. And I had all these fantasies about that in my head. So we drove for a long way through these woods, and it was starting to get kind of alarming. We were in our van following this car, and finally the car pulls up to this. It was a gate, and there was a wall around the gate with razor wire all nailed around the top of it, and then I look up and there's gun towers, and it was like, if you've ever seen the TV show Hogan's Heroes, it looked just like Stalag 13, and the gates creaked open and we drove in, and okay, this is the hotel, it's a concentration camp. And what it was it probably used to be a prison camp. It looked exactly like, there weren't guys with guns in the gun towers, but it was a factory and for Russian workers. And what the guy said, there are two kinds of factories in Poland. There are the good factories and the bad factories. The good factories have Polish people working in them. The bad factories have the Russians, and they need to be contained. And so this was a bad factory, but it was very cheap to lodge your friends in a cell in this prison.
You stupid fool, you! You have been tricked.
And we go to the lady. She gives you a towel and like a little cracker or something, and the key is make very sure that you lock and keep the door locked no matter what anybody says and no matter what. And so this is kind of scary. But I had my bass player Aaron was my roommate in the cell, my cellmate. We locked the door, and it was a good thing to lock it because all night these drunk guys in their underwear were walking up and down the hallways, banging on all the doors, singing these Russian songs and everything. And so it was kind of a frightening experience. We did, our cell had as the one decoration, it had the previous occupant had kind of decorated it a little bit with a picture cut out of a magazine of a couple of hippies walking through a field, one of which looked like Frank Zappa, but I don't think it really was Frank Zappa. Anyway, we took this and used it for the cover of the next album that we did, which is the album Our Bodies Ourselves. So that's how we got that. And so yes, that's one of those things that was terrifying and horrible as it was happening, and then looking back on it is one of the most interesting experiences of my life, and it's fun to tell about it. But I guarantee you wouldn't have had. You would have been terrified. We were all terrified. I wasn't sure. Are they ever going to let us out? This is like, I mean, the film Hostel had not come out yet, but I was thinking along those lines. Okay, so this is what this international criminal kidnapping conspiracy does.
Yeah.
their front is putting on punk rock shows in Poland. But what they really do is they, take you for some sort of, weird medical experiment. So they're going to sell your organs. So I really thought that was going to happen. But we survived, obviously.
All right. Has anyone from your past assumed you created a character about them in King Dork or approached you about it?
Yes. Quite frequently that happens.
Yeah.
But they don't want the answer to be no. Like so then that's what they say. What you mean? This is not. They want to be in it, And it's fictional.
Yeah.
They're, I don't. But yes, I cannot tell you all the ex-girlfriends. Okay, which one is me? Which one of these girls? I
You
to
could
say it,
five different traits from
really,
a bunch of people and create one. So who knows?
Yeah. No, never had the thing where someone was angry because they saw themselves in it. I think that's the beauty of self-deprecation. In your ordinary life and also in your narrators. Nobody is jealous of. No one has any reason to. Tom Henderson or the narrators of many of my songs, or me in person, it's if you beat them to the punch for deprecating you, then it is disarming. I feel that's been my experience.
How did John von Willowitz leaving the band affect the sound of MTX? And here's the appendage to that. It seemed to unlock a rather productive stretch of songwriting. In being a trio, it seemed to drive the band towards a more melodic power pop kind of punk style. What shifted musically during that time?
Yeah, I mean, there's truth in that for sure. Yeah. It was part of it is coincidental. That that was around the time when I was starting to decide to take the composition, the songwriting more seriously. Whereas it had just been very haphazard before, and I didn't care if it was that good or not. It was, I wouldn't attribute that to John Bon leaving. One thing, though, is that, being the sole, guitar player, did sort of, even though it didn't necessarily have to be that didn't have to be the case in recording, do as many guitars as you want. I certainly didn't bring that in. But you did develop a habit of being a little more minimal because when you develop the way of playing, you have to think carefully when you do a guitar solo whether it's going to sound all right. No rhythm guitar behind it, and then sometimes you might decide not to do it. And but also I was focusing more on the writing, and that was what was more interesting to me. So it's two of those things, and also I mean people are often I did this whole Guitar Hero thing on the album that hadn't come out before that, and so then you stopped doing that. Why did you stop it? Some people liked it, some people didn't like it, and it's just that was the album that did that. I was on to the next thing. So yes, but I think that did happen. I would attribute it mostly to previously not caring that much if things were a little bit shoddy, and then I started to try to get my act together around that time.
Yeah, sure. So, also kind of in that area, says during the time between Our Bodies, Ourselves, and Love Is Dead, how did the growing Bay Area punk movement affect MTX? Did you have more spotlight, more label funding, any kind of validation?
What time period do they think that was?
Mostly between the albums Our Body, Ourselves, and Love Is Dead.
Okay, so Lookout we were on Lookout, but they didn't like us very much. We were not Larry's ideal of whatever a band should be was not us, and we were just kind of coasting along, but not very happy with. No one was very happy because it was a very low budget thing. They didn't spend any money on anything, and you always you dreamed of if we could record in a real studio, and we would try to we couldn't afford the fancy things we were trying to do and everything. And so when Green Day hit it big, then suddenly there was a exodus of all. There were people had other options, so all the Lookout bands were immediately saying, "I quit."
Yeah.
So, including me, I was like, I'm going to fund my own recording and put out my own single because I can't, I'm not going to deal with this anymore.